My introduction. My name is Jessica Turner, and I'm 34 years old. I live in a quiet suburb just outside of Denver, Colorado, surrounded by the kind of rolling hills and open skies you only ever see in postcards. If someone had asked me a decade ago to describe my life, I probably would have used words like steady or even uneventful. I was one of those people content with routine. Mornings started with fresh brewed coffee and the smell of my favorite vanilla candle. Evenings quiet and slow, often spent curled up with a book or watching old movies under a patchwork blanket my grandmother sewed. Looking back now, I realize how much I took that sense of safety and normalcy for granted. I come from a family of 3 kids, smack in the middle between an overachieving older brother and a free-spirited younger sister. My dad was a mechanic who could fix anything with his hands, and my mom was a warm, gentle woman who never left the house without lipstick on and always had advice about choosing kindness. I still hear her voice on days when the world feels impossibly harsh. They taught us about working hard, standing up for ourselves, and always believing in second chances. I graduated from Colorado State with a degree in early childhood education and found work at a local preschool, the kind with cheery wall murals and a playground that smelled like wood chips and sunshine. That's where I met Daniel, my ex-husband. Our story started the way so many do. Laughter over spilled coffee, hands brushing in the hallway, casual glances that got longer as the weeks went by. He was charming, confident, and could fill a room with his energy. We got married 2 years later in a tiny chapel. Me in borrowed heels, him with a crooked tie, surrounded by family and friends who toasted to our future. I thought I knew what my happily ever after was supposed to look like. The first real change came when our daughter, Lily, was born 5 years ago. Suddenly, love took on new meaning, deeper, weightier, urgent in a way no romantic feeling had ever been. I adored her endlessly. From the moment she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, my heart lived outside my body. But life, as I've learned, doesn't pay much attention to our best laid plans. The foundation Daniel and I built started to crack, slowly at first, then all at once. I could write volumes about that unraveling, but if you stick with me, you'll hear more than just heartbreak. You'll hear about a fight for fairness, a mother's resilience, and how one ordinary woman rediscovered herself in the middle of chaos. So, I'm starting this story not as a victim, but as someone who has walked through fire and is finally ready to speak truth. This is my chance to reclaim my voice. And maybe, somewhere out there, someone will read these words and find a little hope for themselves. Broken marriage in the darkest days. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the echo of those first arguments, the sharp words ricocheting through rooms that once overflowed with laughter. When Daniel and I started drifting apart, it wasn't like a switch flipped all at once. It was a slow slide, so subtle that I barely noticed it happening, until suddenly we were on opposite sides of a chasm I couldn't cross. Looking back, I think it started sometime after Lily was born. Sleep-deprived nights and the pressure of new parenthood put more strain on our relationship than I was willing to admit. Daniel, who had always been sociable and fun-loving, started spending more evenings out with friends, leaving me at home alone with a fussy baby in my aching exhaustion. I'd sit in the living room, nursing Lily, while glancing at the clock, waiting for the sound of his keys in the door. Some nights he came home late, sometimes not at all. The distance between us hardened in small ways. There was a sharpness to Daniel's sarcasm that hadn't been there before, and a coldness in his eyes that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. It wasn't one single fight or one big betrayal, just an accumulation of resentment, unanswered texts, and conversations that ended in slammed doors. I tried to keep up appearances for Lily's sake, putting on a brave face at family gatherings and sharing photos on social media that made us look happier than we were. But in the silence after everyone went home, I would stare at the dark ceiling and wonder if I was the only one who saw how broken things had become. The emotional isolation twisted itself into something darker. Daniel started drinking more than before. At first, just a little glass of something to take the edge off his day. Then it became a bottle, then two. I found empty beer cans tucked behind the couch and whiskey bottles hidden beneath the kitchen sink. When I tried to talk to him about it, he deflected or accused me of nagging. Sometimes his words would sting so much I'd have to bite my lip to keep from crying in front of Lily. The lowest point came one night when Daniel stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, and let his temper loose in front of Lily and me. I still remember her wide eyes, the quiver of her little chin. That night, something changed inside me. I realized no amount of pretending or wishful thinking would patch up the damage. I couldn't allow Lily to grow up in a home where fear was just another piece of the furniture. Choosing to leave wasn't easy. I spent weeks agonizing over it, weighing every possible outcome. Would I be strong enough on my own? Could I bear the judgments and stares of people who saw divorce as failure? Was I about to destroy my daughter's sense of family? Ultimately, my need to protect Lily, my promise to be the mother she deserved, gave me the courage I needed. One morning, while Daniel was nursing another hangover, I packed a small bag for myself, and Lily loaded her favorite stuffed bunny into the car seat and drove away from the house that was no longer a home. Every mile added to the distance between what was and what needed to be. Those first days on our own were some of the darkest I've ever known. I felt both terrified and oddly relieved. My heart ached, but deep down, a tiny flame of hope began to flicker. I had no idea the challenges waiting ahead or the storms Daniel would unleash in his fury. But for the first time in a long while, I believed that Lily and I might have a shot at a future built on trust, safety, and real happiness. And I promised myself I would do whatever it took to claim that for us. The fierce legal battle. If you've never been through a custody fight, let me tell you, it's a war with invisible wounds. I thought leaving Daniel would be the hardest thing I'd ever do, but standing up to him in court nearly broke me in ways I hadn't expected. Sometimes, the ugliest thing about a person isn't how they treat you in private. It's what they'll do to you publicly when their pride is wounded. After I moved out, it was only a matter of days before a thick envelope arrived at my mother's house, where Lily and I were staying. Inside, legal papers. Daniel was suing me for primary custody. I still remember my hands shaking so bad I could barely peel open the next page. In his petition, Daniel accused me of being unstable, of alienating Lily from him, of failing to provide a safe, nurturing environment. After everything, the words stung. I felt my stomach knot and my cheeks burn with shame, even though deep down, I knew he was lying. Daniel hired one of Denver's most aggressive family attorneys. Their strategy was simple: muddy the waters, paint me as vindictive and unreliable, and weaponize every moment of weakness I'd ever shown. Old text messages were introduced as evidence. Daniel's lawyer pointed out that I'd switched jobs twice since Lily was born, and claimed it showed I was impulsive. Never mind that the first job closed down, or that I left the second to be closer to my daughter's daycare. I spent my days gathering every scrap of evidence I could find, Photos of Lily's bruised shins from playground tumbles, notes from her pediatrician, records of every check I'd ever written for daycare, gas, groceries. All of it felt like armor against the tidal wave of accusations coming my way. Daniel seemed to have endless resources. To me, he was larger than life, a man whose charisma could charm almost anyone, but especially people who'd never seen his darker sides. The psychological toll was immense. I stopped sleeping, haunted by nightmares of Lily being ripped out of my arms. My mother did what she could. She watched Lily, made me tea, reassured me in her calm way. But all I could think was how quickly your life can unravel when the law isn't on your side. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to call Daniel and beg him to just let us live in peace. But every time I looked at my daughter, I remembered why I had to keep fighting. The first court date, I walked into the courtroom in my only suit, knees wobbling under fluorescent lights. Daniel sat beside his attorney, cool as ever, glancing at his phone while I tried not to break down. Voices and footsteps echoed, all rising to a crescendo as our names were called. I felt like both predator and prey beneath the judge's gaze. What followed was a blur of painful revelations and humiliations. Daniel's side called old friends who parroted stories about how sensitive I was, or how I'd let Lily eat ice cream for breakfast once. My lawyer coached me to stay calm, to answer only what was asked, never to lose my temper. Everything in my life felt exposed. The dirty laundry of my marriage up for public inspection. There's a particular suffering in being forced to defend your worth as a parent, as if love could be tallied and compared like numbers on a balance sheet. Of course, Daniel's struggles with alcohol came up, though he denied them flat out. I had photos of empty bottles, screenshots of angry, drunken texts. Neighbors who'd witnessed him stumbling in from the car late at night agreed to testify. I built my case, piece by piece. Lily's trembling hands when Daniel raised his voice. The time he forgot to pick her up from school and only called 2 hours later, half coherent. Every small truth mattered. Behind the scenes, I spent hours with my attorney strategizing for the worst. We rehearsed like actors for a play. What questions I'd be asked, how to remain unflappable under cross-examination. My biggest fear was making a mistake that would cost me everything. Sometimes I would lock myself in the bathroom and sob, praying for courage. Child Protective Services visited our temporary apartment. A stranger in a gray coat jotting notes while Lily colored at the kitchen table. Every interaction was under a microscope. I was terrified that one wrong word, one misplaced sock, would mark me as unfit. But it wasn't just the judge I had to convince. It was everyone. Friends, neighbors, teachers, all bombarded with Daniel's version of events. Rumors spread. Some people stepped back from me, unsure who or what to believe. There were days when the loneliness ached almost as badly as the fear. Still, the love I had for Lily burned like a beacon, calling me forward even as the shadows grew around us. The hardest part was facing Daniel's anger off the witness stand. He called, texted, and even showed up at my work, alternating between threats and apologies. I learned to keep my phone nearby at all times, to screen calls and save every message. My attorney warned me, everything could be evidence. Never lose your cool. Being forced to live as both mother and detective was the strangest, saddest kind of double life. After months that felt like years, the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, my family and Daniel's on separate sides, neither willing to make eye contact with the other. The judge listened as my attorney detailed every incident, showed every scrap of proof, called every witness with a story, that proved Daniel's recklessness. I was called to the stand last. My hands were shaking as I told the truth, the unvarnished, ugly, painful truth about the way our home fell apart, about my dreams for Lily, about the promise I made to protect her, no matter what. When it was over, there was no big moment of relief, just exhaustion. The judge took another week to decide. I spent those days hovering around Lily, waiting, whispering prayers. And then, finally, the call came. I had full custody. It was a victory, but not the kind they show in movies. It was quieter, sadder, and heavier than I'd imagined. I learned a lot about myself in those months. I was braver and stronger than I thought. The justice system is imperfect and painfully slow, but sometimes it does see the truth. And most importantly, I learned that motherhood isn't measured by courtroom victories or spiteful accusations, but by showing up every single day for the people who need us most. The plan for justice, winning custody, should have been the end. But Daniel, nursing both his wounds and his pride, wouldn't let our story stop there. He filed appeal after appeal, spreading stories about me around our small town, a campaign to paint himself as the wronged party. Every time he lost in court, he picked up his fight in the court of public opinion, and I realized, sometimes justice isn't served with a gavel's fall. It's daily, quiet work. And for Lily's sake, I needed a real plan, not just hope. I began by documenting everything. I kept detailed journals, noting every drop-off and pickup, every phone call, every time Daniel missed a scheduled visit, or arrived smelling of booze. Lily became my greatest source of motivation. Her resilience astounded me, even as she asked hard questions no child should. I bought a cheap second phone, recording voicemails and photos as evidence, always with a quiet fear in the back of my mind that Daniel would resort to anything to sway the narrative. With Ms. Harper's guidance, I started methodically building a case, not for court, but for truth. I compiled testimonies from teachers who had seen Daniel's unpredictable moods, from neighbors who remembered his late-night tirades. I asked my own family and friends to write character references, explaining who I was before this nightmare began. At times, I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together the clues of a reality no one wanted to acknowledge. Social services had offered us therapy after the custody trial. Lily and I went every week. Our therapist taught us how to navigate big feelings, to put words to fear and hope alike. Lily's drawings changed, from dark scribbles to bright, hopeful images. I tracked her progress, knowing the court or Daniel's lawyers could ask about it anytime. Therapy wasn't just for court, it was the lifeline for both of us. Daniel's drinking escalated. There were nights he called, voice slurred, begging for forgiveness before turning to threats. I never answered directly, but I recorded every message. Once, I found him waiting outside Lily's dance class, agitated, insisting he just wanted to talk. I went straight to the police station and filed a restraining order that same day, a decision that haunted me, but also empowered me. I spoke to other parents at Lily's school, quietly gathering allies, people who witnessed his unpredictability. It became my mission to show the system, imperfect as it is, that beneath every accusation Daniel threw was a pattern. When he missed work due to hangovers, my lawyer subpoenaed those records. When he checked into rehab for a wellness break, I made sure those details were on file. Not out of spite, but to build a web the truth couldn't slip through. The appeals hearings dragged on. Each time, Daniel's lawyer tried a new tactic. Each time, we met it with calm and fact. I sat through depositions and cross-examinations, that felt like interrogations, learning to steady my heartbeat, answer questions with unwavering honesty, and never lose sight of my goal. There were setbacks, times when Daniel's charm convinced others, or when yet another court date was postponed at the last second. I learned to temper my hope, to measure progress not in victories, but in Lily's laughter and the steady rhythm of our new life. All the while, I poured myself into work, finding solace in the innocent chaos of the preschool classroom. The children's drawings and laughter reminded me that goodness did, indeed, still exist. Some days, exhaustion threatened to pull me under. I leaned on my mother, on late-night walks, on kind words from the few friends who stayed. Then came a confrontation I hadn't expected. I spotted Daniel in a grocery store parking lot, clearly intoxicated, berating a cashier. I kept my distance, but as I watched him, I felt a mixture of sadness and resolve. That night, I sat down and wrote it all out. Every incident, every small cruelty, every moment of courage. It became a living document, one I added to and referenced whenever the weight of the fight tried to convince me to give up. One evening, Lily asked me, "Mommy, why is Daddy mad all the time?" I looked at her, at the way she twined her fingers, at the hope in her eyes, and I realized this was why I documented, why I built my case day by day. Not just for a courtroom, but for the world she was growing into. Lily deserved a life defined by truth, not by the shadows of her father's pain, but by the quiet, everyday strength of her mother's love and determination. By the time the final appeal was denied, the judge's words were almost an afterthought. I already knew I had done right by my daughter, but my plan for justice wasn't just about Daniel. It was about reclaiming my own story. It was learning to stand tall in a world ready to believe the loudest voice, to keep faith with the slow, stubborn work of choosing love and honesty over revenge. Most days, justice is not a banner or a parade. It's the way Lily smiles when she runs into my arms after school. It's the way I walk, unafraid, down my own street. And it's the certainty that, no matter how the odds were stacked, I made a choice to be the parent my daughter deserved and the woman I needed to become. The intense courtroom showdown. If you ever want to know what it's like to have every aspect of who you are ruthlessly exposed and dissected, just find yourself standing in a crowded courtroom opposite your ex-spouse. That's where real fear lives. Not in haunted houses, but in the sterile chill of family court, where strangers in formal attire decide who deserves the right to raise your child. When my final court date arrived, my stomach was a knot of dread and wild hope. I remember waking up before dawn, long before my alarm, lying on my mother's living room couch and staring at the shadowy ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of my daughter down the hall. For the 1,000th time, I mentally rehearsed my testimony and reviewed the chronological parade of evidence in my mind. Court was scheduled for 8:30 a.m. Denver traffic that morning felt like an obstacle course set by fate to test my nerves even further. My attorney, Ms. Harper, a small but formidable woman with salt and pepper hair and the posture of a ballet dancer, met me outside the courthouse doors. "We're prepared," she said. Her confidence was the thread I clung to. In my oversized navy suit, clutching the file folder that held my entire life for the last year. I didn't feel brave or tough, but for Lily, I would stand taller than I ever had before. Stepping inside, we were hit with the scent of stale coffee, anticipation, nerves. My former in-laws sat on the other side of the aisle, cold, unblinking, arms folded in subtle unity with Daniel. He looked every bit the character his lawyers tried so hard to create. crisp suit, no trace of the reckless man I had grown to fear. When he nodded at me, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Resentment, sadness, maybe even fear. It was enough. The trial was set before a judge, and exceptionally, a 6-person jury. Each side would present evidence, witnesses, and arguments over the next 3 days. I watched the faces on the jury, some stern, some curious, some openly skeptical. Their gazes would decide Lily's future. Ms. Harper whispered last-minute reminders. Answer simply, breathe. Every detail matters. Daniel's side went first. His lawyer, a man named Grayson, famous for his bulldog cross-examinations, launched into a narrative designed to reduce me to just a set of failings. Jessica Turner, he announced, has displayed instability and questionable judgment. She's moved homes twice in less than a year. She has alienated Daniel Turner from his child and created a toxic environment based on suspicion and mistrust. My heart raced with every clipped accusation. They called an old friend of ours, who, under pressure, offered lukewarm support for Daniel. Photos were shown from social media, harmless moments twisted into a story I barely recognized. Lily with a scraped knee, me holding a wine glass at a holiday dinner, Lily snuggling in my bed during a thunderstorm. Next, Daniel testified. His story was polished, almost rehearsed. He talked about the pain of being away from his daughter, how much he loved her, how difficult it was to watch his marriage collapse. He denied drinking excessively, claimed the empty bottles found were left over from party guests, chalked up his angry texts to stress and miscommunication. At first, his words almost got to me. In some ways, he really was a splendid actor. But this was not the Daniel I'd come to recognize in the dark, lonely nights when fear crept in with the smell of stale beer. Then it was my turn. Ms. Harper stood beside me as I took the stand, facing what felt like an ocean. My palms sweated as I gripped the microphone. Quiet filled the room, punctuated only by the rustle of the stenographer's fingers over the keys. Please tell us, in your own words, why you left your marriage. Ms. Harper began. Something inside me steeled itself. This was my chance for truth. I spoke slowly, my voice trembling at first, before gathering strength. I told the story the way I remembered it. The gradual unraveling, the sleepless nights, the fear in Lily's eyes, Daniel's drinking, the violence in his words, and, once, in his hands. I explained how I'd found courage in the smallest actions. Preparing breakfast, walking Lily to daycare, learning to document everything because I could no longer trust words alone. I admitted to my own mistakes, my lost temper, the nights I cried myself to sleep, my moments of despair. I brought evidence, text messages from Daniel, timestamps showing his late-night absences, testimony from Lily's teacher about her sudden withdrawal during Daniel's visitation weeks. I had copies of police reports and receipts, therapist notes. I presented the journals I'd filled with daily observations, some entries barely more than a sentence. Daniel didn't show. Lily asked why Daddy yells. No bruises today. Grayson seized the chance to cross-examine. He pressed me hard, picking at my memory, trying to trip me into contradictions. Isn't it true you once forgot to pick Lily up from preschool? Didn't you allow Daniel visitation even though you claim he was a danger? Every question was meant to throw me off balance, but each time I answered as honestly as I could. Yes, I was late one time. I called the teacher immediately and apologized. I followed the court orders because I was afraid of being seen as uncooperative. The truth, it turned out, had fewer cracks than all the clever stories in the world. Our witnesses took the stand one by one. Lily's pediatrician, who described stress symptoms she'd noticed. My neighbor, who'd seen Daniel drop Lily off intoxicated. Even my mother, her hands shaking as she explained the fear our home once held. Every testimony felt like adding a plank to the bridge I was hoping to build for my daughter. Daniel's lawyer tried every angle. He questioned my motives, pointed to the restraining order. Isn't getting a restraining order just a way to get the upper hand? I looked the jury in the eye, voice firm. I filed for protection because I am protecting my daughter. That was the only thing that ever mattered. Late in the afternoon, Child Protective Services presented their findings. The investigator recounted home visits, interactions with Lily and Daniel. The tension in the room was electric, every detail weighing heavy. When Daniel's side called their own witnesses, there was a strain. A few longtime friends echoed his version of our marriage. A work colleague vouched for his improvement in a rehab program. There were moments the scale seemed ready to tip, doubt flickering over the jury's faces. The next day was closing arguments. Ms. Harper, as always, was steady and compelling. She made no grand speeches, but focused on Lily, her right to safety, to stability, to a childhood free from adult conflict and fear. This case isn't about punishing mistakes, Ms. Harper said, voice unwavering. It's about protecting a little girl and allowing her mother, who has already proven her devotion, to provide the stability every child deserves. I wanted to cry through the closing, but I held my breath, watching the court reporter's face instead. When deliberation began, time froze. My family and I sat in the hallway, listening to the buzz from other cases, footsteps echoing on marble. Every few minutes I checked my phone, scrolled through photos of Lily, her smile on the swings, her focused eyes painting, her sleeping face framed by sunlight. Ms. Harper squeezed my hand once, whispering, "No matter what, you fought with everything you had." It took the jury 6 hours to decide. Back in the courtroom, everyone filed in, heartbeats thundering under composed exteriors. The foreman handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The moment stretched, longer than any night spent waiting for Daniel to come home. The ruling was short and simple. Full legal and physical custody to the plaintiff, Jessica Turner. I felt my knees buckle. A rush of release, so sudden it nearly knocked me over. Daniel didn't look at anyone. My mother wept softly. Ms. Harper allowed herself the tiniest smile. Nothing about the victory was easy or clean. Daniel's lawyer immediately filed paperwork for an eventual appeal. There was no cinematic ending, no celebration in the hallways, just a slow gathering of my things, hugs from my mother, and a heart that felt both heavy and light. When I picked Lily up from daycare that day, she ran into my arms, hair wild and cheeks rosy. "Are things better now, Mommy?" she asked. I held her close, promising her softly, "Yes, sweetheart, things are going to get better now." That night, as Lily slept, I sat by her bed and allowed myself to feel the exhaustion, the pain, the scars no one could see. Courtroom battles are wars, fought in daylight, under scrutiny. But winning custody was more than a victory. It was a resurgence of hope, a chance to breathe, and the beginning of a promise I would spend the rest of my life keeping. No more looking over my shoulder or doubting myself. There would be new challenges ahead, but from that moment, I was no longer just surviving. I was moving forward for myself and for my little girl. The weeks following the verdict were a blur of paperwork, appointments, and managing the rough edges of transition. Even as Daniel's legal team began to murmur about appeals, I felt a newfound clarity. I understood now that courage wasn't the absence of fear. Real courage was showing up, again and again, even when you were terrified. My attorney helped me navigate post-judgment logistics, updating school records, revising custody agreements, meeting with Lily's therapist and social worker to ensure she had tools to process the changes. There were awkward moments, like running into Daniel at the grocery store, or receiving a stilted text from his mother, still tangled with hurt and confusion. But the sharp threat of losing Lily was gone, replaced by the steady, sometimes overwhelming reality of beginning again. I started to reach out to other single mothers in my area, some through support groups, others through chance meetings at the park. I realized how many of us battled in silence, how many had sat in courtrooms clutching evidence, hoping to be believed. We swapped stories about co-parenting apps, reliable lawyers, even how to handle birthday parties when families were split. That solidarity became a lifeline for me, a way to patch the wounds only another survivor could understand. Each evening, I crawled into bed with a notebook, sometimes to write down my fears, sometimes to list things I was grateful for. Lily's giggles, an unexpected kindness from a neighbor, a slow Sunday morning with pancakes. I noted the days when Daniel did show up, sober for a visitation, trying not to let bitterness seep into my voice when I spoke to Lily about her father. She was still so little, and I wanted her to keep as much innocence as she could. There were dark nights when I questioned everything, when the courtroom scenes replayed in my head, Grayson's barbed questions, the jury's scrutinizing eyes, Daniel's chilling glances, but I kept reminding myself that I had spoken the truth. I had survived the worst and made it through. Sometimes simply getting up the next day, making peanut butter sandwiches and braiding hair for school, felt like reason enough to keep going. It wasn't long before Daniel tried to test the boundaries set by the court. He pushed for more visitation, attempted to rewrite the story with friends and relatives, and threw around vague accusations just to see what would stick. My lawyer had warned me. After the courtroom, the war moves to the everyday. She was right, but facing Daniel in court had shifted something deep inside me. I no longer felt powerless. I turned to the order of protection we'd secured, documenting every interaction, keeping my phone at hand to record calls or messages if things escalated. I made careful notes after every pickup and drop-off, aware that, legally, vigilance was still my best defense. Through it all, I poured energy into rebuilding a sense of normalcy for Lily. We created new rituals, Saturday morning cinnamon rolls, art projects that left the kitchen a collage of colored paper and dried glue, afternoon walks through our neighborhood. The absence of fear changed our home in subtle ways. Music played more often, laughter came easier, and bedtime stories became our nightly anchor. Lily's therapist noticed the changes too. Her drawing shifted from tense, stormy swirls to bright colors and princesses. She began to sleep through the night without waking from nightmares. Her questions about her dad becoming less urgent, less edged with anxiety. Once, while we were painting birdhouses at the dining table, Lily said, "I like our house better now, Mommy. It feels safer." In that moment, all the struggle, the exhaustion, the pain of the courtroom felt worthwhile. I hugged her hard, whispering, "We're safe now, baby. I promise." Looking back, those courtroom days taught me more about myself than I'd ever known. I learned to measure victory not only by legal rulings, but by the triumphs that no one else sees. The way Lily ran across the schoolyard and into my arms, the silent, powerful solidarity among women who have fought the same battle, the slow return of my own voice. Every so often, I pull out the thick folder of evidence, court transcripts, and testimonies. the paper trail of a life fought for and won. Some nights I cry, grieving the family I thought I'd have, mourning what Lily lost too, but I always find my way back to gratitude. Gratitude for the judge who listened, for a mother whose love never wavered, for friends who stood at my side even when the gossip was thick and unforgiving. I know that not every mother in my position gets a fair outcome, and I carry their stories with me, too. I've written letters to advocacy groups, spoken quietly to women in the grocery store, whose eyes told me they recognized my pain. Maybe my story, with all its sharp edges and cracks, gives hope to someone else. If so, even in the smallest, quietest way, my fight has been worth the wounds it left behind. Justice returns. The morning the final decision was announced, I remember it wasn't marked by any sudden change in the weather or extravagant sign from the universe. In fact, sunrise was muted. The sky a gentle gray, washed over the quiet Denver suburb, and our little rental's kitchen countertop was cluttered with the ordinary. Lily's half-finished cereal, yesterday's unopened mail, the growing pile of custody paperwork resting atop the bills. For weeks, I'd lived in that limbo, waiting for justice, unwilling to hope too much, afraid that a single phone call could unravel everything I'd fought for. Each day leading up to the verdict had its own flavor of anxiety. My nights were broken into fitful hours, brain looping through a highlight reel of the trial, Daniel's lawyers biting questions, my own trembling voice on the stand, the way jurors' eyes sometimes softened and sometimes sharpened as the stories played out. I'd become almost superstitious, wearing the same modest silver necklace to every court date, drinking the same plain black coffee from the chipped blue mug that had come with us from my old kitchen. It was a routine that, in its smallness, offered comfort amid the enormity of waiting. There are chapters in a person's life that are defined entirely by patience and grit. And my battle for Lily's safety, for some small slice of justice, was exactly that. The immediate aftershocks of trial, the closing arguments, the long walk through courthouse corridors flanked by strangers' faces, the mixture of exhaustion and relief when the doors finally closed behind me, taught me the steep cost of hope. Still, I had learned perseverance. Lily and I carried on with the patterns we'd laid. School runs, evening baths, story time snug, underneath my grandmother's quilt. I never let her see the fear in my eyes when the phone rang. Never let my voice betray the panic when Daniel's lawyer's number showed up again, demanding yet another scrap of evidence or response. I would not let my little girl grow up in terror of what might be taken away. I'd kept vigil over my phone the morning the verdict came. My lawyer, Miss Harper, had promised she'd call the instant a decision landed at the court. I paced the living room, dusted the windowsills twice, and eventually sat cross-legged on the floor with Lily, coloring clumsy rainbows and taking comfort in her giggles, so bright and untarnished by everything she'd survived. No matter what happened, I told myself, she deserved a childhood where security wasn't a fragile thing. When the call finally came, I nearly missed it. Phone half buried beneath a stack of coloring books. My hands shook as I answered. Miss Harper's steady voice on the other end, delivering the one sentence I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. Jessica, the court has ruled in your favor. Full legal and physical custody. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My world seemed to go quiet, as if time itself bent and buckled around that moment. Are you sure? I asked, the words escaping on a whisper, half prayer. A weight lifted off my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying so long. Tears sprang to my eyes. Relief, gratitude, exhaustion, all muddled together, and I reached for Lily without even thinking. She clambered into my lap, studying my face with the unfiltered curiosity that only a young child can possess. "Are you happy, Mommy?" she asked. I hugged her fiercely. "Yes, baby, I'm happy. We're safe, and everything is going to be okay." In the days that followed, reality slowly set in. Justice, as it turns out, doesn't arrive with confetti and a marching band. It slips in quietly, reshaping the day-to-day in all the ways that truly matter. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch at a knock on the door. I no longer scanned the driveway with dread, expecting Daniel's car idling outside, or some new threat stuffed inside my mailbox. My calendar was no longer filled with court dates and lawyer meetings. Instead, there were dance recitals, play dates, and the simple luxury of unremarkable days. But the wounds of battle lingered, and I had to adjust to a new normal. My legal victory didn't erase the pain or undo the months of uncertainty. I still jumped at unexpected calls. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., convinced I'd dreamed the verdict, only to sit in Lily's room and watch her sleep, reassuring myself with every steady breath she took. There was a deep fatigue coursing through me, the sort born not just from lost sleep, but from months of vigilance, the unrelenting need to keep our lives together, despite all odds. People in our community reacted with polite relief or hesitant curiosity. Some who'd kept their distance during the custody fight now offered cautious smiles, a few tentative congratulations. My family, especially my mother, wrapped me in support, the kind only those who have witnessed your darkest nights can provide. She baked bread, folded my laundry, watched Lily so I could rest, all without asking for explanations. I no longer had the energy to give. Together, we rebuilt our small circle of safety and trust. There were administrative hurdles, of course, updating records at Lily's school, notifying doctors and therapists about her new legal status, collecting the mountain of paperwork that now belonged fully to me. Ms. Harper walked me through every step, always patient, reminding me that bureaucracy was just the final phase of the journey. Even Daniel complied, however reluctantly, signing over the required documents and, after one last bitter message, falling silent for a time. Yet justice meant more than a line drawn on a court document. For me, true justice was watching Lily blossom once the threat of upheaval faded. She began to thrive in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. Her nightmares subsided. Laughter returned more freely. She made friends at school, painted colorful pictures that no longer had angry scribbles or shaded corners. I began to see glimpses of hope in both of us, a willingness to plan for the future, to root ourselves in this second chance life. One of the deepest lessons I learned was about resilience. For all the talk about strength in the abstract, it's different when you live through every uncertain day, never knowing whether the system built to protect the innocent will hold. There were many moments I doubted myself, wondered if I'd fought the right way, if I'd done enough to shield my daughter, if there were wounds in my own heart, too deep to ever fully heal. But I discovered that the stubborn insistence to keep going, to show up, document, ask for help, trust the process, even when it seemed stacked against me, was itself a powerful form of justice. I also found meaning in community. Other single mothers who'd faced similar trials reached out. My story, in its messy imperfection, offered them a glimmer of hope. We met for coffee, texted encouragement late at night, babysat for each other in a makeshift network of solidarity. It was in these women, quietly fierce, unflinchingly brave, that I learned the importance of testimony. Our stories, shared honestly, could nudge the world a tiny bit toward compassion and fairness. Lily's therapist suggested we mark our new beginning with a ritual, something small to symbolize the end of fear and the start of freedom. We planted a tree in our backyard, just a sapling then, its roots soft and unsettled in the earth. As we watered it that evening, I told Lily that trees grow stronger if their roots are tested by wind and rain. We're like that tree, I explained. Every hard thing we've survived has helped us grow. Now, we get to see what we become. Justice also returned in the tiny details. The dinner table conversations, where Lily asked unselfconscious questions. My own relief at no longer censoring my words or walking on eggshells. Together, we set new routines. Movie nights, pizza Fridays, walks to the park without the undertone of anxiety humming beneath the surface. I watched Lily reclaim her innocence, and in doing so, I reclaimed pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. Of course, life after justice is not the same as life before pain. I still carry scars, visible and invisible, and sometimes I have to reassure myself that we're truly all right. There are flashbacks and unexpected moments, a ringing phone, the way a stranger raises their voice, a fleeting shadow that reminds me of courtroom battles past. But those triggers are less frequent now, and I face them with the knowledge that I've already walked through fire once and survived. Looking back, I don't romanticize the ordeal, nor minimize the damage Daniel caused. Justice doesn't always look like vindication, and it certainly isn't winning in the petty sense. Instead, it's finding a measure of peace, security, and dignity for yourself and your child when the world tried to take it away. It's being able to answer your daughter's late-night questions with honesty. Did you ever doubt yourself, Mommy? All the time, I'll confess. But I never stopped fighting for you. That, I hope, is the legacy Lily carries. Not the memory of courtrooms and conflict, but the unyielding love that refused to let injustice have the last word. As our tree now grows taller outside our window, I know our journey is far from over. There will be new chapters, unforeseen obstacles, and perhaps echoes of the past. But with the return of justice came the freedom to dream again, to imagine a future not defined by survival, but by possibility. So this is what justice looks like for me: quiet, hard-earned, and fiercely protected. It starts anew every day in the laughter of my daughter, the strength of found family, and the promise I keep to cherish what we have rebuilt and never again take safety and love for granted. The value of faith and life lessons. When the dust finally settled and I could breathe without that familiar vice of dread tightening in my chest, I realized just how much this journey had changed me, not just in the glaring moments in court or the tangible victories marked with a judge's gavel, but in the quieter corners of the everyday. I had entered this battle fighting for justice, for my daughter's future, and, in a way, for the person I used to be. But what I carried out with me was something less dramatic, yet infinitely deeper, a restored sense of faith, and lessons about life that only hardship could teach. The most profound lesson, I think, is about trust. Not the kind you give others, but the kind you build within yourself. For years, I had doubted my every decision, questioned my worth as a mother, worried that every step I took might lead Lily and me further into chaos. So much of the journey was spent learning to silence that inner critic, to listen instead for the small, steady voice of perseverance that never truly left me. There were mornings when I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired, yes, and battered, but also possessed of a resilience that hadn't been tested before. I learned that faith in the system isn't always rewarded, but faith in oneself is essential for survival. I suppose the second great lesson is that love and pain are often intertwined, and that the vulnerability we feel in loving someone so completely, be it a child, a parent, or even an old friend, is both our greatest risk and our greatest protection. My love for Lily was the compass guiding me through fog and storm. Sometimes it was all I had. I now believe there is a sacred stubbornness in a mother's love, a refusal to accept defeat or despair, even when logic or society tells you the odds are impossible. Yet, faith doesn't just happen. It's built, brick by careful brick, especially when it feels most fragile. There were times, alone in the darkness, haunted by legal threats or biting words from Daniel, when faith seemed little more than a fairy tale for the lucky. But I kept moving forward, choosing every day to believe in a version of the future where safety, healing, and happiness were not just wishes, but possibilities within my reach. I found that faith is an action, the daily decision to rise, to show up, to make breakfast and pack lunches and comb knots from Lily's hair, no matter how hopeless or worn I felt. It's in the small acts of trust, in myself, in those who showed up for us, and in the truth I knew, even when others didn't see it. Over time, those invisible investments paid dividends. They became the bedrock Lily and I stood on, steady, even as the world swayed around us. The legal fight taught me much about the fallibility of justice and the courage it takes to persist. I realize now that laws and courts are imperfect tools, wielded by people susceptible to bias, fatigue, and error. Some nights, I still replay testimony in my mind. What I could have said, the evidence I wish I'd had, the times I swallowed my anger or fought tears as strangers weighed my motherhood on a scale. There were moments when the courtroom felt less like a quest for truth and more like a test of endurance. True justice, I learned, is sometimes a destination you walk toward, knowing it may never look exactly how you imagined. From that hard-won perspective, I understand now that fairness is not guaranteed. It is demanded, protected, and, when necessary, rebuilt, bit by bit, moment by moment, across weary months and sleepless nights. I hold a deeper regard for every person, man or woman, who's ever fought a battle inside or outside a courtroom. Most will never have their victory headline in a newspaper or trend online, but that doesn't diminish their courage. The world is full of ordinary heroes whose only monument is the better life they build for their children. And I was lucky enough to meet some along the way. Community, too, has become a pillar of my faith. In the loneliest months, when courtrooms and gossip threatened to swallow me whole, I found lifelines in unexpected places. Fellow single moms at playgrounds, sympathetic teachers, even the barista who remembered how I took my coffee when I was too sleep-deprived to remember myself. Each small kindness stitched a new patch into the quilt of my support system. Letting people in, allowing myself to be seen as vulnerable and not just strong, was its own leap of faith. I learned that sharing your story not only lifts your own burden, but lights a candle for others lost in similar darkness. Teaching Lily about faith has been another unexpected gift. We talk now about truth and courage, about standing up even when your voice shakes. There's no shield big enough to keep all of life's pain away from our kids, but I can show her what it means to survive, to keep your heart kind, and to believe that things will get better even on the hardest days. Sometimes her wisdom stuns me. The other day, watching the sapling we planted after the trial stretch just a little higher toward the sun, she whispered, "It's growing, because we kept watering it, even when it didn't look like much. I smiled, knowing it was more than a tree lesson. It was a blueprint for living. Of course, some lessons are painful, and faith doesn't shield you from loss. There are friendships that fractured under the strain, people I once trusted who turned away, or believed Daniel's stories without ever asking for mine. Betrayal leaves a raw edge that aches on quiet afternoons when life is finally calm. I have learned that forgiveness is less about the other person and more about allowing myself to move forward without carrying the poison of resentment. Not every wrong can be mended, and not every friend lost will ever be replaced. But such losses carve out space for the things that truly matter. A circle, perhaps smaller, but unshakable. More than anything, I've learned that faith and hope are daily choices, not permanent states of being. There are still nights when anxiety comes pounding, or days when I second-guess a co-parenting decision, or mornings when the memory of Daniel's anger returns sharp and sudden as hail. But I now know these moments don't define me, nor do they dictate our future. They are simply the echoes of what we've survived, reminders of the work it takes to rebuild a life. Practical lessons have emerged as well. I am more organized, more vigilant, more attuned to warning signs, not just in legal matters, but in the minutiae of everyday life. I have learned how to advocate, not just for Lily, but for myself, to ask questions, to demand clarity, to refuse to be steamrolled by authority figures or drowned out by louder voices. I research, I double-check, I document. Even now, with justice on my side, I keep records, not from paranoia, but from the knowledge that the world can shift beneath your feet in an instant. Financially, I have become more cautious. The drawn-out legal fight taught me the value of a safety net, however small. I squirrel away what I can, refusing to be caught unprepared again. I say no more often. No to requests that deplete my energy. No to relationships that flourish only in good times, but evaporate when storms come. My priorities are clearer now. Lily, safety, honesty, and the quiet, ordinary joys of daily life. I find myself more grateful, too. Gratitude was something I once reserved for big gestures and obvious wins. Now it's found in the soft click of the front door locking at night, in Lily's giggle as she reads a new book, in the silence that settles over our home as I wash dishes alone after dinner. Peaceful, unhurried, a world away from the chaos behind us. I even find gratitude for the hardship. As painful as it was, it cracked open a new understanding of what I am capable of. It showed me that even when I felt broken, I could still be enough. Perhaps the most unexpected lesson is how healing isn't a finish line. I used to believe that victory in court would mean an end to self-doubt and uncertainty, a clean slate. But healing is a spiral, occasionally looping back through old wounds, rarely ever linear. Still, each loop grows wider. You visit the pain, but you don't stay. Our lives have slowly filled with new rituals and milestones. Lily's birthday brunches, the first time she slept through the night without nightmares, the way we both reach now for hope without fear it will be snatched away. Looking back, I see now that faith is not the blind optimism that things will always work out, but the determination to keep going, even when they don't. It is the resolve to keep loving, keep fighting, and keep believing that the smallest act of kindness, the softest word of encouragement, the next hopeful morning, these are all worth their weight in gold. I hope that Lily, as she grows, takes these lessons with her. I hope she knows that no storm lasts forever, that truth matters, and her voice matters, no matter how much someone else tries to silence it. That trust should be offered thoughtfully, that boundaries are acts of love, and that bravery often means simply refusing to give up. If someone reading my story sees their own pain in these words, I want to say, your struggle matters, your fight is seen, and hope is not foolish. There is power in surviving. Strength is found, not in perfection or victory, but in the willingness to begin again every time you are knocked down. Let faith be the quiet thread that holds you together, and let the lessons learned from loss and love guide you gently forward. In the end, life's value is not measured by a tally of triumphs or the absence of hardship. It's written in the bonds we form, the integrity with which we act, and the resilience we nurture, not only for ourselves, but for all those who walk beside us and all who will come after. For Lily and for myself, I choose every day to live in that value, to honor the faith that survived the fire, and to teach her that always hope is an act of courage.